had the chance to get caught up with Jonathan Petramala. He is an Emmy-winning journalist and storm chaser. He's got a new documentary out about Hurricane Ian. It's called The Price of Paradise: Surviving Hurricane Ian. Ian was a monster hurricane that hit Southwest Florida in late September 2022. It was a high-end Category 4 storm, had sustained winds of 150 miles per hour at landfall. Ian killed nearly 150 people in Florida and caused widespread destruction and flooding. Also caused flooding in the Carolinas, where it was blamed for several more fatalities. Ian was one of the worst hurricanes to ever hit Southwest Florida and one of the deadliest hurricanes in Florida since 1935. The storm hit western Cuba before it came along and pummeled Florida. And Petramala was in Cuba along with his producing partner, Brandon Clement. They run a production company called Climate Productions, and they provide storm footage to news outlets and around the country, maybe even outside the country. So we talked all about that experience of chasing the storm in Cuba, took a look at some of the footage from the film. Some of it is extremely dramatic, the likes of which has maybe never been seen before. So we discussed that. We discussed many of the survivors that they interviewed for the film, some of them who endured unbelievable conditions, and it's amazing that they're even alive right now. So we talked all about that, talked also about him covering other storms, whether he ever gets scared when he's out venturing into this extreme weather. He's a really interesting guy, also a great storyteller, great news reporter. So here he is, Jonathan Petramala. It's been a while since I've talked to you. It's great to talk to you again. How the hell are you doing?
It's like a different lifetime since I think the last time we spoke. Being independent and having the freedom to tell stories like what we're going to talk about has been an amazing revolution of my life and a whole different chapter. And it's been exciting. And I can't thank you enough for the opportunity to talk with you about it and maybe share this story that will interest more people to go and see it. Because, as a storyteller, the biggest thing you want is, of course, your story to be heard and seen by as many people as possible. So thanks for your opportunity.
Hell yeah. When I saw it, like I said, I was like, I got to talk to you about this. So thanks for coming on to talk about it. Cause I was fascinated. That movie poster is awesome. And
it really does tell the story of Hurricane Ian. If, when we're talking about it, maybe, like you said, you put the poster up, but you'll see the flood, the house getting ready to collapse and float away in the surge on Fort Myers Beach. And then on the top part of the poster, the Coast Guard helicopter and a rescue diver coming down onto Fort Myers Beach. And that was really the scene that kind of encapsulated the heart of Hurricane Ian.
Yeah, it's crazy. So we'll talk all about that. We'll get into all that. One thing I want to say too, but I should have mentioned it before when we were chatting before we started recording. But I love your background. It's so sunny and nice in Florida. There, where are you? You're in Tampa or St. Petersburg? Is it?
Yeah, St. Petersburg. St. Petersburg. Yeah. And it's kind of ironic. We're talking about Hurricane Ian, and this is where it was supposed to come. The majority of folks, for the majority of the time that Ian was kind of building up through the Caribbean, crossing Cuba, this is where everybody assumed it was going to come. And I had left my home to fly to Cuba for the first landfall, knowing that there's a good chance when I come back, my house is going to be damaged or my hometown is going to look completely different. And it made that curve, and it made a lot of changes in my life and people down in Southwest Florida's life. And it was what a wild turn of events.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. You started, obviously, the forecasts were out. It was developing and gaining strength quickly. And then it was headed for Western Cuba. So you leave Florida and you're going to Cuba because you've got a company that tracks all this, and you're catching all the footage and you're trying to get into the most extreme parts of the storm. So you had to Cuba, right?
And again, the forecast was for it either to come here to Tampa Bay, or it was going to miss to our north to the Big Bend of Florida. So if it did that, with the way that the atmosphere was working, this monster of a storm would have weakened upon landfall up into North Florida. So we look at it like this. Everybody wants to come in and shoot video of the hurricane, right? I mean, there's just people coming out of the woodwork now who are storm chasers and want to get that shot, or there's just people with cell phones. So for us, it was kind of a no-brainer. Let's go to Cuba. Everybody's going to be talking about the hurricane for days, but nobody's going to have footage of the actual hurricane. Well, if we're in Cuba, we're going to have footage of that hurricane. And especially if it's going to North Florida or even Tampa Bay, that's 2 to 3 days of just talking about a hurricane. So a big part about what we do is we shoot video and we sell it to networks. All the networks use our video. And we were by ourselves there in Pinar del Rio, which is the provincial capital of Western Cuba. And that was kind of the nexus of doing it. And then, of course, once we get there, the forecast starts to shift. And initially, when we were going down there, Pinar del Rio was going to be on the far eastern side of the eye at the very most. And then all of a sudden, we're bullseye. So that means that hurricane is starting to shift to a more northeast position. And that means that there's a good chance we're not going to get out of Cuba. So when I tell you that when I'm in Cuba, this major Category 3 hurricane slamming into Cuba is the 5th or 6th thing on my list of concerns at that moment, I'm being very sincere, because I was like, we got to get back to Florida. How are we going to get out of Cuba? How am I going to get back to Havana? Is, another battle. Then you're battling a communist regime and army and all this stuff. So it was a very complicated and stressful situation.
Yeah, that sounds crazy to me. So you go down to Havana, Cuba, which is eastern Cuba, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah, it's like the central part of the island. Yeah.
And then how do you navigate over to where the storm's going to hit? How do you, because like you don't know Cuba, right? I mean, or do you?
I've been there a couple of times before, but this is a different Cuba in terms of things are so bad there that it's almost unrecognizable from when I first went back in 2016, 2017.
Really? In just 6-7 years, huh?
Yeah, I mean, it's as bad as it's ever been. People talk about the 90s after the Soviet Union failed and how bad it was then. But talking to folks down there, I mean, it's worse now, and I can believe it. It's just a different atmosphere. It's very depressing. People are desperate. 1 million of them have left just in the last year. It's just an incredible number of folks who are leaving Cuba, and justifiably so, because it is just desperation everywhere. No food, no supplies. We bring them, candies and toothpaste and toiletries and stuff, because I know how much that matters when I visited in the past. And people are breaking up in tears getting a toiletry bag, right? It just kind of shows you the desperation that they're in. So there's a friend.
Well, that's amazing that you guys do that for them. With all that you've got to take down all your equipment and whatnot, you're bringing some stuff to give out to them.
We want to really try and leave. Yeah, I mean, we want to leave a place better than when we left it, right? And at least develop some relationships. And I still talk to, actually, a guy just texted me from Cuba. So I still talk to folks, but I had a friend who works at Telemundo here in Tampa, and she has family down in Havana. And so they were kind of our fixers. They did a terrible job fixing, but they tried. Yeah. And so we had a taxi driver who allegedly was going to drive us over to Pinar del Rio, which is about an hour and 20 minutes drive to the west from Havana. And it's a major highway, like a major highway in Cuba. And so we were confident that, okay, well, it's a big highway. We're not going to get blocked by trees or power lines. We should be able to make it back. And if we have a driver, we're going to be good. And Cuban Spanish, I'm an intermediate Spanish speaker right now, I'd say. I'm more familiar with the Mexican accent. And so Cuban accents are difficult in the best of times to understand. But I was able to have a conversation with the driver, and he said, "Oh yeah, I'm gonna, stay, and everything's good. I'm not nervous." I was like, "You're not scared?" He's like, "Oh no, I'm good." I'm like, "Okay." And as soon as we get to Pinar del Rio, I was like, "Okay, wait here. I'm gonna go get your hotel room, and we're going to, be good to go and be ready for the hurricane tomorrow." "Oh no, I'm not staying." And at that moment, you're like, "What? You're not staying? Like, this is the whole deal. Like, the whole deal. We're going to pay you money. Like, you want money? Here's money. Like, we're going to give you more than 6 months salary for an average Cuban, right? Just to stay with us for one night.
Yeah.
So we had to make
so he can bring you back, right? That's why you need.
Yeah, because that was the main thing, to get back to Havana, because that's where the airport is, and that's how we're going to get back to Florida, hopefully in time for the Florida landfall.
Yeah.
And at the time, we still thought there was a chance of that. So we had to make that decision in the moment. It's like, okay, what's our confidence in being able to get a ride back from Pinar del Rio after a major hurricane hits and destruction to get back to Havana? So that's a decision you have to make in the moment. We'll figure it out. And so we just said, "All right, man, get out of here, you jerk." And so we stayed. And from that moment on, my biggest stress was like, how am I going to get back from Pinar del Rio to Havana, Cuba? And
so,
again,
so that means hold on one sec. That means you're there without a car? You have no vehicle?
No vehicle. I didn't. That was the biggest thing we do over. We would have rented a car instead of rely upon obviously a taxi driver. But at the time, it's like, do you know how to rent a car in Cuba?
No,
I don't know how to rent a car in Cuba.
I don't know. You can't.
I don't know. Like, I mean, like, it's like, what kind of car are we going to get? Like, I'm going to rent a car and then willingly drive it into a Category 3 hurricane. And what happens when it gets destroyed? And I'm like in Cuba. Like, I don't want to go to a Cuban jail. Like, what am I going to be paying this for this car? You know what I mean? I was like, I'm not doing that. So that was it was just like the fear and doing this independently. Like, we're not getting backed by a network. We don't have NBC News and New York City Rockefeller Center ready to back us with their billions of dollars. You know, this is just me and Brandon. So, you know, that was the decision. And it's like, all right, well, we're just going to do it this way and we'll figure it out from there. And so, yeah, and the hurricane shifts. We're in a hotel that says they have the generator capacity and it's going to be just fine. We're going to have electricity. Great. They did for approximately 24 hours.
Yeah.
Internet. Yeah. So we had light at least. It was an early morning landfall. So it was starting to really hit about midnight, and it really ramped up about 4 a.m. I would say in Pinar del Rio. And it shifted. So we were literally bullseye, dead center eye of Hurricane Ian hitting. And in Cuba, in the United States, we would be in a car usually, or in a parking garage or somewhere outside, being able to kind of move, be a little bit more mobile to get some footage. But there, they don't let you out of the hotel. Like, you're locked down. So it was okay because we were the only building in the whole city with light for all night, because we were the only one with a generator. We were the only one that has Western tourists ever. So we, get the doors kind of, looking like they're wanting to break open and stuff, the sound, water leaking in, windows breaking open, stuff like that. So that's kind of the footage we got at night. Right around dawn, the eye's coming over us. And so we're going out and getting some of the damage.
We're in the backside now of Hurricane Ian. The eye lasted for a very impressive hour and a half. So we were able to walk around and get a sense of what the damage that was caused overnight as Ian was making landfall on the front side. That eye, again, coming right over here, the provincial capital of Pinar del Rio. What we've seen so far, some roof damage, power lines down, and on the backside, more damage going to be caused by very strong winds at time. Whiteout light conditions, not able to see more than just a few dozen yards in any direction.
And they're not just picking up debris, they're literally like carrying corrugated metal to improve their home, right? Like it's like apocalyptic in a way, because these people are so poor that they're literally taking the broken debris that's blown from one house and they're taking that debris to put it on their house, right? Like, that's how poor they are, and they're trying to improve it. So that's kind of the footage we're getting there. And then all of a sudden,
that's in the eye. So in the eye, when it's very calm, these people are taking
very
the
calm
opportunity to go out.
And I'm a few blocks away shooting video, and it starts getting squirrely, and I go, wow, we're gonna have a backside to this eye here, huh? Because again, I don't know for sure at that moment that we're in the eye of the hurricane. Like, we could have been missed. I didn't know that it had shifted that much because I didn't really have internet. Like, to get internet in Cuba, they give you a card. It's like a scratch off ticket, and you have 1 hour to use that code. And then at that hour, it stops, and you have to take another code, scratch off the code, and then log again. So that's kind of the process, right? And
how's that internet service? It's not, I imagine.
I mean, it's better than Mississippi, but it's not the best.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not ideal. And so I get back to the hotel just in time. The backside of the eye is really, really ripping. And people who were in Florida for that will tell you that was probably the strongest backside of an eye of a hurricane they've ever been in. And we definitely witnessed that. I call it a Hemingway hurricane because just the experience, again, it was the furthest thing from the fear of the actual hurricane or worried about the hurricane. It was more, again, the logistics and military guys out and about. We have a friend who's probably the only other American that I know of who's ever been in a hurricane willingly in Cuba. And it was years ago. And he had mentioned that they like to take the cards, SD cards. So I was always popping in dummy SD cards into my camera after I get shots. And I was shooting video on my cell phone that was in the hidden file that you have on iPhone and stuff. So I did get stopped. I did have to give up a card to the Cuban military and stuff after that. So that was an interesting experience in its own right. Then
how did they get that one card? Did they search you, or what happened?
Well, I'm shooting video of the damage, and this is after the storm has left. So it's about 9:30 in the morning. And again, I've been up since 24 hours, basically just getting video and going through the hurricane. And I'm shooting video, and the military's there, and I kind of like immediately move to the side thing, switch out the card, and kind of pop back in. They're like walking over, and they are yelling at me. So I force them, like, these guys have guns, and I'm in Cuba. I don't look. Cuba is a very diverse place, but I definitely do not look like most Cubans, right? And I'm not dressed. I'm not acting like most Cubans. Let's put it that way. A lot of Cubans are light skinned and Italian looking, but they were like, what are you shooting? What are you doing here? You're not allowed to be out of your hotel. You're, not from here, blah, blah, blah. Let me see your camera. Let me see what you have. And then they're just like taking it. And I'm like, okay, go for it. I'm just here on vacation, like I'm not a or anything like that. I'm like just playing stupid American, I'm not really even speaking Spanish with them, because I just want them to be more frustrated that they're having to deal with this person who doesn't understand them than really kind of thinking about what they're doing and what I might have been doing or something. And because, the government doesn't want to show how like their cities are crumbling and how the structure's been destroyed. Right.
Yeah.
So I get out of that situation, and then it's about that time where it's like, okay, we got to figure out how are we going to get back from Pinar del Rio to Havana.
Yeah. Do you call your taxi driver? Do you give him a call? Is it like
yeah, right. He gave us his number, but surprisingly the phones are down right after a major hurricane had come through. So I talked to some folks, and they're like, oh, go to this bus stop. There's a lot of taxi drivers there. Of course, there were no taxi drivers there. And there's this one, it was like I was in a movie. And there's a lot of these moments where I was like, am I in a movie right now? Is there a camera crew around? There should have been a camera crew following us, because I'm telling you, it would have been some of the best TV ever. And it was like the shady guy. He's like, hey, come here. What are you guys looking for? And I go, taxi driver. And I go, oh, I got one of those. I got a car. And so he goes over to this phone that was working. And in the doorway of this shady ass building we're at, it's this guy kind of doing like the heroin squat, you know what I mean, that you see in the movies, like the guy kind of like just waiting for his next fix.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is not going to be an ideal situation, but we're so desperate for a car. I was like, let's just kind of go with it. Like Cuba, if anybody who's watching this podcast or listening to the podcast knows anything about South America, you typically don't want to get into strange cars. Cuba is a different kind of a place. It's a very safe country. It's the safest Latin American country I've ever been to. It's changing, of course, with the desperation, but like I would never have done this in Mexico, for instance. Cuba, I felt okay with. Yeah. So eventually they get this car over, and I'm talking to Brandon, and I go, Brandon, there's a pretty good chance this is, they're going to try and rob us. Like, at some point like this, I don't know if this is going to be ideal, but we had told him, I was like, we got to go to this hotel to get our bags and stuff so we can get to Havana. They're like, okay. And then they start taking us a weird way. I have a very good cognitive map. And so I had a pretty good idea where I was. And I was like, these guys aren't going to the right spot. And so it's kind of shady, but it's 2-on-2. I felt pretty good at my chances with 2-on-2 with no guns, right? And we get blocked by a tree power line. And so we're like, oh, we got to get out and get video. So we get out and just get out of there, because who knows where they're trying to take us. So
yeah.
That was one dodge. And so we're back around the hotel, and I see in the windshield of a car, there was a Mexican flag. And I told Brandon, I was like, my God, I would kill to know whose car this is and like talk to this guy. And so we're standing outside of our hotel, and I hear the Mexican accent. And then I go, so I start talking to the guy, and he's like, oh yeah, I'm from Texas, in English. I'm like,
oh my God.
I thought you were from like Cuba, man. Like I had no idea, because I'd seen him all night, but I hadn't talked to him, and I hadn't heard him talk. So I didn't even know he, had the Mexican accent, that he was from Mexico originally. And he was totally cool. He's like, yeah, I'll give you guys a ride. And this 50-something-year-old guy, in town visiting his girlfriend who lives in Pinar del Rio.
Wow.
And so we're like, cool. So we got our stuff, and I'm like, all right, we're gonna get back to Havana. We're gonna get back. This is gonna be great. Well, he's like, all right, I have some bad news, guys. I only have enough gas to go 30 miles. And he's it's such a small car. I'm like, you must have like this much gas in there, like to only be able to go 30 miles. And there's no power, so nobody can get gas. And so, but then the next miracle happens. He's like, all right, listen, I know this taxi driver. I use him all the time when I'm in town. Let me give him a call and see what he can do. I'm like, okay. And the guy like answers, and he's like, all right, he's going to be here in 30 minutes. I'm like, at this point, I'm like, all right, we'll see.
Hold on a second. Are you guys like also, the storm is now out over the Gulf, right? It's heading north over the Gulf. Are you paying attention to like, are you tracking it on?
We don't have any cell phone reception. We don't have any, like, nobody knows if we're alive, really. They just know these two guys are.
But you guys know that the clock is ticking if you want to get back to Florida to get all the video.
We had a flight scheduled for that night. Yeah. So it's a deadline knowing that to get back, it's that night. Like that's it.
And
worst case tomorrow morning.
Are you feeling the pressure at that point, or?
It's the top thing on my list. It had nothing to do with being almost robbed or you know, whatever. It's like just getting back to Havana at all costs. Like I'm getting in any car at this point. Candy truck, you know, somebody comes in with a, one of those old school vans. Hey kids, want to come with us? I'm like, let's go. Like I'll take candy and let's go. So absolutely feeling the pressure. But the guy, it's been 30 minutes. Taxi driver showed up. I'm like, all right, I don't know the next thing we're going to do. And out of the corner of my eye, I see this flash and I go, what kind of car did you say this guy had? And he's like, oh, it's like an old car. I was like a 1957, 1956. He's like, yeah. And lo and behold, this beautiful, like that turquoise green from the 1950s Ford Fairlane pulls up. And I'm like, this is amazing. And lo and behold, this guy shows up. I'm 99% sure he was drunk. Didn't care. You know the movie The Waterboy, where you have that Cajun guy who's like blah, 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 and you can't understand what he's saying.
Yeah,
it's like that guy's that guy, but in Spanish. Like that's how bad his accent is. Like there was no hope of communicating other than Havana. Like it was bad. Like I couldn't understand a word he said. He didn't understand me really. It was hilarious, but. It was quite the experience being in the back of a 1956, 1957 Ford Fairlane, going around down power lines, down trees. We get back to the highway and we're starting to get a little concerned at this point because the further we're getting away from Pinar del Rio, the closer to Havana, we're still seeing a lot of damage, a lot of trees down, a lot of power lines down. We're like, holy crap, this hurricane was big. It was damaging a lot more. Now we're getting concerned, like, are we going to be able to fly out?
Yeah.
So we're going to this foreigner hotel in Havana. We get there. It's right around dusk and everything is booked. There is no rooms anywhere. And that's our only hope for internet at this point. And we're just like, we still don't know what's going on. Nobody knows we're alive. Like nothing is, we're in Havana at least. And, we're trying to check on our flights. And so somehow the guy's like, says something to me and at this point, Havana's black. There's no electricity because it's past dusk. We've driven around to a couple of hotels. They're all booked. And it's pitch black in Havana. This is the first time a hurricane has ever knocked out power to the entire island. Hurricane Ian did that to Cuba. And so we pull down the street close to the central part of Old Havana. And he motions me to get out. And I'm like, all right, we're going to see what's going on here. And it was this really nice guy who had owned what they called a Casa Particular, which is a Airbnb essentially, but it's a privatized private accommodation for tourists. That's how they used to do it and how they have done it for a lot of years in Cuba. And he had a room open, no electricity, of course, but he spoke English. Really, really nice guy. He directed us to go to the Western hotels in Central Park, they call it. And so we were able to walk just a couple of blocks to get over to Central Park. And I saw two Westerners walking by. They wouldn't let us in the hotel. We tried to bribe our in. They wouldn't let us in. And so we're still stuck right outside. Like you could see, it was like the trading places, where they're like outside the window and like everybody's like having a champagne and lobster. That's what it was like. Everybody's having champagne and lobster inside. We're on the outside in the dark.
And you're trying to bribe your way in.
Exactly. Yeah. It's just, it was.
And when
just
you do your bribing, do you carry like a wad of cash that's specifically for bribing or like greasing palms and stuff like that?
You have to. Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's just the only way to get things done.
And so when you're doing it, are you using American dollars or
well, a little both. Cuba has screwed up their financial system, like just in a way that's mind-boggling. But they used to have two forms of currency in Cuba. They had the cook and the Cuban peso. So the cook is for the foreigners, and it was a 1-to-1, $1, one cook. And the Cuban pesos was more like 25 to 1 or whatever, but it was illegal for foreigners to possess. But that's how the Cubans were able to participate in their own economy, was through the Cuban peso. Well, they decided to make one currency, and they artificially set it at like 120 to 1. And people started making their own. So you could go out, you could do a money changer for like 120 to 1, or you could go and get like 200 to 1. So things were just wildly fluctuating leading up to the hurricane. This is not a hurricane cost problem. This is a government cost problem. And so to exchange money, we just talked to the bellman at our hotel. Some guys came to our room and had like a suitcase full of money, because it's kind of like, it's like a Weimar Republic, right? It's just stacks of money that, like $1 was like 400, it's really crazy exchange rate. And so it was just done in the hotel room.
That is wild. Yeah, you're right. You should have a camera crew just following you. Yeah, stuff like that. Although those guys probably would not pull the suitcase out if there were cameras.
They were totally cool. Like, people are very relaxed. It's pretty funny how they just want to survive, and it's not funny that they're that desperate, but I mean, it's just
right.
It's a different world. It's not as dramatic as people want to make it seem, but it is life, and that's how it is. And then, so we get to that place, we get to the hotel, and I see two guys walking, and I go, "Guys, do you have internet on your phone?" And they're like, "Yeah." They're from the Netherlands, and they let us log on to their phone Wi-Fi. And so
like a hotspot.
Yeah, exactly. So I just logged on, and I had like 9 minutes to figure out that all our flights have been canceled. The storm's moving to Southwest Florida. And that's the only way to get from Cuba, is to fly into Southwest Florida. So you can really only fly to Miami, Tampa, I think maybe Fort Lauderdale. That's it. So we started coming up with the plan. I'm like, we could fly to Mexico and then fly and go around the other way.
Oh my God.
And so that was how we start formulating the plan. And the next morning, I was able to pay my way into that hotel and get real internet, have my wife help. She's really good at travel as well, and she's from Mexico. So I was able to kind of figure out the way to escape. And how we did it was go from Havana to Merida, Mexico to Houston, Texas to Panama City, Florida. We drove from Panama City, Florida back to Tampa to pick up his car, Brandon's car, which is outfitted with bright lights, and computer, and it's what you really need to really cover these events and get video out to our customers and stuff in a timely manner. So it was a necessary thing to do. And we made our way all the way up to South Carolina for the second U.S. landfall. It was a Cat 1 at that point in South Carolina.
So getting out of Cuba, though, you essentially just flew in a big circle around the storm, right?
We literally, circumnavigated the entirety of the Gulf of Mexico, just the opposite way. So we missed.
How long did all that take? How could you do that so fast?
I'm really good at logistics. That's the only way I can tell you. Like, I'm really good at logistics. Like I hate to be a bragger, but I'm really good at it.
Yeah.
So
all right. So that's amazing. So now you're in Tampa. You're back to Tampa. You got Brandon's car with all the gear. How much time do you have? Like, where's the storm at this point?
Storm had been raking through Florida, causing flooding in central Florida, like Orlando, erosion on the East Coast, is just getting in the Atlantic Ocean. We're in Tampa. I take a shower when we get back, because I hadn't had a warm shower in 2 days. We hadn't eaten until we got back to Mexico, actually. And so it took like 2 days before we had food. And, we actually checked a case of water to Havana, like literally a case of water. And it was the best thing we ever did, because it definitely saved our life. But he takes a 30-minute nap while I shower and get packed and ready to go for the next landfall and hurricane. And we make it up to to Georgia that night, and we take a little like 2-hour nap in Georgia, and we finish the drive, and we're there for South Carolina, and we got some crazy storm surge. It was probably the most relaxed, chaotic moment ever, where I was like, we were driving by this near Georgetown, South Carolina. I look over and I see fire engines and stuff, and it's along the water. So I'm like, there's got to be some storm surge here. And we pull in, and lo and behold, the high water rescue truck. And I was like, hey, can I like ride with you guys while you go rescue people? They're like, yeah, sure. And it was like a neighborhood gathering, basically pulling dogs and people and old ladies through this water that was like belly deep, I would say, in that part of South Carolina at the time. And so, yeah, I got some amazing footage, amazing little stories with people. Everybody was kind of like, it was very Southern. It was like, how y'all doing? Oh, can you believe this water? I mean, it was really just kind of a surreal thing. And so we got that footage. And one of the main reasons why we decided to go up for the second landfall, there was what's called a TFR, meaning you can't fly over Southwest Florida at that moment. So a big part of what we do is drone. Brandon's, I would say, the best drone pilot in the world. And so we're like, all right, well, let's go get this. And by the time we get back to Florida, maybe we can do fly. And so that's what we did. We did that second landfall, and we drove back. And by the time we made it to Southwest Florida, it was we had to assess the damage. And we were the first two people to get out to Sanibel and Captiva Islands, and just started to document this damage and start to gather stories, because we knew that this was something that was so impactful. We needed to start sharing these stories, and it's going to be a documentary.
Yeah. I mean, so a couple of things. I mean, first of all, one of the worst hurricanes that ever hit Florida, and certainly Southwest Florida, right? I know Andrew was probably worse on it, but that was...
That's Southeast. That was Miami. Yeah. I mean, this is a major hurricane, Cat 4, the deadliest storm surge since Hurricane Katrina. And it was in a populated area. Hurricane Michael was obviously a Cat 5 on the Gulf Coast, but the difference between Michael and Ian storm surge, Michael storm surge, it devastated Mexico Beach, but Mexico Beach is a little beach town. Yeah. Fort Myers Beach is a whole different beast.
Yeah. Yeah. Hugely populated.
Yeah.
But then it went over the peninsula, slightly over the Atlantic, turned back, like you said, and I think it hit as a Category 1.
It was a Category 1 in South Carolina. It still destroyed a few dozen homes, caused damage to a couple hundred
people
homes.
Died there.
It was still a very dangerous storm in South Carolina, and we did include part of that in our documentary. But of course, our main focus is Southwest Florida. That was the main impact. That was the Cat 4. That was the storm surge of 15, 17 feet. I mean, that was the devastation.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk about that storm surge footage that you guys got, which is just amazing. Where did that come from? And maybe I'll just put it up here. Tell us where this is and how you're doing this.
So that is on Fort Myers Beach. That is the main road. It's just, I'd say, a quarter mile from the bridge that you take to get onto the island. And it was set up by a couple of guys, Max Olson, Aaron Rigsby. Max Olson has for years experimented with what he calls surge probes or surge cams like this. It's not a new idea to storm chasing, but you got to imagine that's Max right there. So he's the one that put that up, and he and his chase partner, Aaron Rigsby, the night before had found a concrete telephone pole. And Max like 6'4", I'd say 6'5". And so he's standing on top of an SUV, and he's strapping the camera, which is, it's like a camcorder attached to a battery pack inside of a Pelican case. So it's waterproof. Right. But trial and error over the years, sometimes you put the camera up and the wind's blowing at the lens, right? You can't see anything. Sometimes the water gets above the lens. Yeah. So when he's putting up at the time, he's thinking, there's no way, like, this is way too high, and it's going to lose perspective. If the water is way down here and my camera's up here, it's not going to look as dramatic. That was what his concern was. Right. And in the end, he literally put it at almost too low.
I mean, there were a couple of times there, the water went up over the lens.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So there's a lot of serendipitous things about that video. The reason why it's so unique is just, we've never seen that kind of a view before. We've never had the technology where a hurricane has hit such a populated area with that kind of a surge. So he just lined it up perfectly. They got that great footage. they see the house floating away, right? So when they were able to retrieve the camera, and this is touched on in our documentary, it was the last possible place they could have retrieved it from, because they couldn't drive further down the road onto the beach because it was blocked by debris, power lines, sand had been moved over. But they were able to retrieve it the next day, which is also super rare. The fact that they were able to get onto the island was crazy because it wasn't blocked by police. There was no emergency help there, really. People were just kind of, they describe it like a zombie apocalypse. That's what the scene was like.
Yeah.
And they posted to YouTube, and it was just kind of like, all right, this is the surge coming in, this is the intense part, and this is the surge going out. They just wanted to show like what storm surge can really, really be, because that's a real big message from this movie that we're trying to get out there, and their video is going to get out there, is just what is storm surge and why is it so dangerous. This is a great example of that.
I mean, this really illustrates it. I feel like, and I've seen a lot of, working at a weather company and doing editorial, I've seen a lot. I feel like I've not seen anything quite like this before. And you said this is sort of never before seen, right?
Yeah, I mean, nobody's ever seen something like this. This is super unique footage. And once they post it to YouTube, they see it come across a comment the next day. And the comment's like, I hope the guy that is peeking at his head at such and such moment in the video is okay. They had no idea that somebody was in the house that they had floating across, right?
Yeah.
And once they did see that, they went back to the footage and they didn't see him leave. And they're thinking, this guy's dead.
Yeah.
Right? Who survives that? How is that survivable? And so they're very guilty. They're thinking that they have just uploaded the last moments of somebody's life. And then the next day they get a message again in their inbox. Hey, that was my brother's house.
Wow.
And they're like, oh no, they're going to be so upset. Like, we just have shown their loved ones like last moments. They're okay. Like, this is the story. And they survived. So it was.
So those people they were in the house when it started floating away.
They were in that house. They didn't leave. It's a long story, and it's a big part of a documentary. Yeah. But they're able to get out of the house. It's a man, his girlfriend, and 2 dogs. And so the story of how they got out, where they got taken to, how they survived, is just a testament, I think, once again, to just how tough it is to kill people. Because my God, the ability to survive that after you see that footage is just almost unthinkable. And so that's how we were able to get in touch with them, was through Max and Aaron. And we were able to go find Todd and Annette, the people inside the house. And so that's kind of the main focus of our documentary at the beginning. But then the story of the house of where they floated to, and the couple that owned that house, Sheena and Summer, is just another level of craziness. And we have footage that kind of ties this all together, and these stories that come together. And their fight for survival they weren't alone. There were so many people in that same situation who were taking out in the surge, being pushed. You're not swimming in that storm surge. You're going where it takes you. And, people clinging to trees, clinging to boat docks, the big pillars on boat docks, the pilings, just amazing stories. And so all those start to come together as the main core of what our documentary touches on. And so the fact you have these stories that have never really been told, and you have the visuals to back up what they're saying.
Yeah.
To go along with, it's just mind blowing that we were able to get that. And it all started with that video from Max and Aaron, and it just kind of snowballed. And
yeah. You get the first person account of how it all felt in that moment.
A lot of people might watch that video and they're like, man, those people in the house are stupid. We're not stupid. We just, we didn't know never see anything like that. You don't expect something like that,
A storm surge watch gives an effect into a hurricane watch.
Seen a bunch of palm fronds flying down the street, and I was like, this is it. We're in a hurricane now. It wasn't. That was just the beginning.
His girlfriend is not in the trailer. Her story of survival was even more amazing, if you can believe it.
Really? She was in the house too?
Yeah, she was in the house. And she had 2 dogs attached to her the whole time, saved them as well as her own life. Wow. Somehow. I mean, it's just, like I said, people are a lot harder to kill than you think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is truly amazing. I've watched it a bunch of times just because it's so amazing. I noticed that the quality also in terms of what I've seen and not seen before. That was like it seemed like 4K quality to me.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Is that what it is? It's like,
oh yeah, everything's, I mean, it's high quality. It's an HD camera. So, I mean,
Yeah.
it's again, such a unique perspective. And then the user generated content, as we call it in the biz, the folks that we've interviewed, they have so much of their own footage that we're able to kind of bring into this. Obviously Todd and Annette, they don't have a cell phone anymore, right? That was gone in the flood, but they were the house where they ended up floating to and surviving. Spoiler alert. The ladies, they had their own content that they were shooting, and it really helps continue the narrative along. I mean, this is such a complete story from a story perspective, from a first person story perspective, from a visual perspective. It really adds the drama and the real life. Like, this is what a hurricane is. When we talk about why you should leave because of storm surge, this is why. These are the stories. This is the video. I mean, it's pretty clear. Unfortunately, I think this is a movie that is important, not just for people who live on the coast, who are susceptible to that kind of a storm surge, which is critical. Because again, you haven't seen it. I haven't seen it. Nobody's really seen storm surge in this stark of a term before. But I think it's also a good lesson and something that emergency managers and communicators really need to watch as well, because it shows how past hurricanes are the reason people make decisions for this hurricane. Hurricane Charlie, I think, is the main reason. It's not Hurricane Ian that killed these people, it's Hurricane Charlie in some ways. And I'll explain that. People's experience with Hurricane Charlie, whether it was a forecast that the surge didn't quite get up as high as it was maybe advertised to them. So it's something that they look back in their own personal experience and say, well, it wasn't that bad in Charlie. I survived Charlie just fine.
Yeah.
Each hurricane's different, and this is why. But also, why did people stay on that island? Why would people take the chance? Well, in Hurricane Charlie, they kept people off the island for a week, 5 days to a week afterwards. Can you imagine you leave your home and you don't know what's there, right? And for days. And so people didn't want to be kept off the island. And again, this happened again in Ian. But a lot of the people we speak to in the movie, the reason why they stayed, the guy in the white hat you showed, Anthony, Summer, Sheena, is because they didn't want to be away from their home for such an extended period of time. Yeah. And in some cases, they saved lives because they were actually there, which you'll see in the film as well. But obviously, it's not an ideal situation for anybody to feel that they need to stay because of a choice the government's making. Sometimes, is it a good decision to keep people off? I mean, that's up to you to decide. I think people have a property right that they should be able to get back and check things out. But then again, could they be impeding rescue efforts? I don't know. I'll tell you this: the government wasn't there. The government wasn't there right after the storm. The storm chasers made it to the island just fine, but the government was not there. So you tell me.
Yeah.
That's something for people to decide.
It's complicated. I agree with you, though. I think you've got to have the right to stay. It's your property. You've got to be able to take that chance. However, maybe it's ill-advised, maybe it's not. I mean, I'm always fascinated with why people don't evacuate when these mandatory evacuations are issued and whatnot. And I think you also in prior to this, you've talked to people who've rode out the storm and survived and stuff. And it's always interesting to hear from them. There's a range of reasons, it turns out. It's not always, just like adventurous, I think, as you're pointing out here.
Again, a lot of times it's just that personal experience. Everybody associates what they've gone through in their own lives to this event. But again, each storm, even if it's an identical path, which it almost was to Hurricane Charlie, almost an identical track. Yeah. It had such a broadly different impact that people didn't expect. The size of the hurricane mattered, right? Ian was a bigger hurricane, so it's going to push more water. It's going to have more wind. Charlie was a smaller, more compact storm. It was more of a wind event type of storm. So, but people just kind of focus on track sometimes. And again, that comes back to communicating. And that's something that folks with the National Hurricane Center and other meteorologists should probably look at as something to consider for future events. Yeah,
Charlie was 2004.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's a long time too, you know. So there's a fair amount of people probably live down in that area that maybe didn't experience Charlie too,
or any hurricane. You got to think most people. There's a 500,000 people that move to Florida every year now. I mean, maybe even more. After the pandemic, I think it accelerated. So many people from the Northeast.
Yes.
And a lot of people think that they've been through a hurricane, but the reality is like, no, you haven't. Like people here in Tampa Bay will talk about Hurricane Irma from 2017.
Yeah.
Like it was something. And it's like, guys, it had already made landfall in southern Florida, Southwest Florida, and Marco Island. It had made all the way up the center part of the state. And the center was around Lakeland, which is 50 miles away from here. Like you're not experiencing a real hurricane. Yeah, it was windy. Yeah, power was knocked out for a week, but that's not a hurricane. And so people have to understand and kind of have some a reality check of what a hurricane is and what they've experienced. And a lot of people just haven't. And especially if you move from like Ohio, what can you possibly compare this to?
Yeah.
Not a blizzard. Trust me.
Yeah, nothing. Hey, just want to back up a quick second. I'm going to share my screen again just to, I want to illustrate your point about the size of Ian versus Charlie. Did you see this from Madison?
It's a great perspective.
Yeah, so that's great. That shows how much bigger it was. I mean,
look at that eye. Look at the eye difference.
Right? Isn't that unbelievable? And then the other thing too is, as this tweet is making note of, is the quality of satellite imagery in 18 years. It's gotten so much better.
Yeah, I think what do we have? The GOES 16 now. Satellite probably doing this one.
Could be.
Yeah, and that eye, I mean, you're talking about an hour and a half, 2 hours being in that eye. And that's what it was in Cuba. I know. I think Florida was pretty similar. And then the backside of that eye just came in and really just ripped. And what wasn't already damaged came down in the backside of that eye.
Just to go back to that storm surge footage, that was from where again? Where did you say that was?
Fort Myers Beach.
That was Fort Myers Beach. So that was on the mainland too. That's another point. Right?
Yeah. So, well, the surge did come into the mainland. I think it's Estero Boulevard. Yeah.
Wow.
So it's close to the Lani Kai Hotel. You'll see it kind of in the left side of the frame.
Yeah. That high-rise hotel.
Yeah. The high-rise Lani Kai. Yeah. It's very well known. Another thing that the documentary will touch on and people need to kind of understand too, is just how transformative these storms are. I'm speaking about the Lani Kai for an example, and these bars that everybody's been loving for 50, 60 years, right? To come to Fort Myers Beach. Fort Myers Beach was, if you don't know, was a very classic Florida 1960s cottages. The Lani Kai, that tiki culture, right? That would have come from the 1950s after the World War II. And it was very calm, very local feel, very chill. And this storm will completely transform that place because those 1960 cottages, they're not going to survive in this world. They no longer exist. They were wiped completely off that place. The only thing you see around are these new 3-story edifices, basically, right? These giant buildings that are large vacation homes for most people. The locals are going to be pushed out. People who are in the middle class are not going to be able to really afford that, even after the insurance, because the taxes as well as the insurance rates to protect their homes. Yeah. And a lot of people are like, do I really want to go through this again? Because we're going to go through it again. Like, there's no doubt about it. And so we touch on that in our film. We touch on what's a solution to this. Just a few miles away is a place called Babcock Ranch, and it is way off the coast. So don't get me wrong. It's kind of apples and oranges. I'm not trying to say that this is the way to go, but they built that community specifically to sustain themselves against natural disasters like hurricanes and, future storms. They said FEMA showed up and were like, doesn't even look like a hurricane hit here. But the hurricane sat over them for hours and hours and hours. And the most damage that was done was maybe a couple of shingles off a couple of homes, and stop signs were knocked over.
Yeah. And they never lost power too, right?
Never lost power. Yeah.
They're solar powered. Yeah.
They have solar and they have gas power. So they're very sustainable. They also have immensely complicated flood plans and designs that keep water moving where they want the water to move and not into people's homes and driveways and stuff. So it's a really incredibly complicated yet thoughtful way that they built that community. And that's something that more and more communities are going to have to think about. I live in a place of St. Petersburg where we haven't been hit by a major hurricane in over 101 years now. And so all of that housing stock has been built up over that past century. And we're the most densely populated place in Florida, not Miami-Dade, because they have the Everglades there. So we have a very dense populated area. There's not a lot of land that is just empty. It's all filled with homes. And most of these homes, like my home, is built in the 1940s. So what happens when we get hit by a major hurricane? We can't really build sustainably, right? Because, I mean, quite frankly, our homes are built in a different era.
Yeah.
But afterwards, just like Fort Myers Beach is going to go through, we're going to have to rethink about how we build and how to be sustainable. What is sustainability? It's not some hippity dippity way of thinking. It's like, isn't the most sustainable thing to not have to rebuild after these predictable hurricanes that are going to keep happening, because they always will happen here? Not talking about climate change, not talking about any of that stuff. I'm just saying, like, isn't that a pretty sustainable way of thinking? Like, to build in a way that you're not having to get more material and rebuild and start over again,
100%. And it's very possible too. Like you mentioned, I think you covered this story for AccuWeather. It was before I got there, but after Michael, there was that one home on Panama Beach that survived. I think, what did they call it? Something, it had like a nickname.
The cathedral or the castle or something.
Sandcastle of the Sandcastle of
Yeah. And they made a very specific conscious effort to how they built. They overbuilt everything. So Florida is kind of a weird place where Southeast Florida, like Miami-Dade, and South Florida, where even Fort Myers was, they have a stricter standard for hurricanes, because we've had larger hurricanes hit that part of Florida more than northern Florida. So the further north you get in the state of Florida, the building codes are not as strict. And so the panhandle was the least strict. And so that's why building codes are really, really important when it comes to surviving natural disasters. A lot of the stuff that was built after Hurricane Charlie did just fine in Hurricane Ian. That's something to keep in mind as well. So a lot of the stuff that was destroyed was just the pre-Hurricane Charlie stuff, and stuff that had stood there since the 1940s. Same thing up in Panama City, but in Mexico Beach. A lot of those homes were the same era, post-World War II, cottages, single story. There's no way they can sustain themselves in a storm surge 15 to 25 feet. Like, that's just not going to happen. So it's something to consider. That guy who built the sandcastle over-engineered everything. If the building code was for this, he built it to this, and it stood just fine. Even the design of the roof was built to handle winds well in excess of 200 miles an hour.
Yeah. So that proves that it can be done. And that home looked like nothing happened at all. Meanwhile, everything around it is just leveled.
But who can afford that?
Right. I know it's expensive for sure. But
again,
he also went to an extreme, right? It takes some amount of, like, you've got to put the codes into effect. The local governments have to do that.
Percentage,
maybe it doesn't have to. Yeah.
I don't think it's as bad. I don't know. And again, I'm not an expert in this by any stretch of the imagination, but I will say that the homes in Babcock Ranch were affordable. They were affordable for an average person that makes a good salary. I'm not saying that everybody can afford that, but I'm saying for somebody that makes a good salary can afford that. It's not like you have to be a doctor, a surgeon, or a lawyer to afford these homes in Babcock Ranch. You can, work for, company X that you're pulling in $60K, right? With a wife that's making $50K, you could probably afford that house. Yeah. So it is affordable in a way if you build it to scale. And so maybe that's what we're going to have to transition to, is that all these homes are kind of being built to a scale. And that's just maybe the cost of what you're going to have to do when you live along the coast.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So you mentioned the transformative nature of Hurricane Ian, and I want to talk to you about that too. What you guys saw when you got there in the aftermath, and how bad it was, and how you compare it to other stuff you've seen, because quite frankly, you've seen a lot. You
get desensitized for sure. Hurricane Michael was a good preparation for Hurricane Ian, just because I'd seen that bombed out storm surge city before, right? I'd seen all the homes kind of wiped away from the beach and piled along Highway 98 up in Mexico Beach in the Panhandle. So seeing homes and seeing that kind of destruction, I'd seen it before. This is obviously a little bit different because it's Fort Myers Beach and it's just bigger. And so there was just more. There was just more destruction everywhere. And that means more lives impacted. And so that was really the thing. And you're thinking about places like Sanibel Island, Captive Island. How many people do you know have been there?
You know, I don't know if I think I know one person who's been to Sanibel.
But you've heard of it.
Yeah.
Have you heard of Mexico Beach before?
I hadn't, not before.
Yeah. So that's kind of my point, is like, you've probably known somebody that's vacationed there, you've vacationed there, you've heard of it. Yeah. So you also have that aspect that a lot of eyeballs and a lot of interest was there just because of its location. So that made it even more impactful. Just like, you know, a storm hitting New York City is going to matter maybe to more people than a storm hitting Wichita, Kansas, right?
Yeah. And were you, speaking of Sanibel, were you surprised what happened to that bridge, that Sanibel Causeway there? I'm just going to put that up. You guys got some amazing images of that. That's the Sanibel Causeway there, right?
That was the old Sanibel Causeway, and it knocked Sanibel Island into, I don't know, the last 30 years ago, because they used to only have a ferry from the mainland out to Sanibel Island and Captive Island. And I mean, that just shows you again the power of water. Water is the most transformative thing we experience. And wind, you know, when people close their eyes, they think of hurricanes. Most people will think of wind, but they really, really need to think about water. And that's a good example of the power of water, that it can take something that you think is so sturdy and well built, like a causeway like that, and just crumple it and make it look like it was just built like a child built it.
Yeah. That's what it looks like. It looks like a kid, you know, it looks like a tiny little toy that a kid came in and just stomped on or something.
And folks had to be rescued from Coast Guard helicopters that were on the island. You can imagine the amount of damage that was caused. It wasn't most places were not necessarily wiped out, especially, like I said, if it was built after Hurricane Charlie, it survived. But there were some hotels and there were some older buildings that got wiped away, just like it did on Fort Myers Beach. But here's the thing too. Storm surge is finicky. Miles really matter when it comes to storm surge. So the difference between Sanibel Island's southern tip to the north part of Captive Island is pretty dramatic in terms of how the storm surge was. Fort Myers Beach is a whole different ballgame, just because, again, how it's shaped. If you look on a map, as it was described to me, it's like a catcher's glove, ready to catch that water. And that's where the water kind of built up. And so that's why the damage is more dramatic on Fort Myers Beach than even Sanibel Island, which there was a lot of damage there. But Fort Myers Beach was really the focus. And that, again, just mattered about miles, where the storm was positioned, where that wind was blowing, and where that water was coming in from.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing. And you guys got so much amazing photos and video of the aftermath there. It was real. I mean, just the boats tossed all around and the homes just shredded to pieces. It was unbelievable. So I'm wondering too, you know, you talked to a lot of people, obviously, who survived and who whose properties were completely destroyed. You know, what do you think? Like, what do you take away from these people who lived through this horrible experience?
Well, I think most importantly, of course, it's just another reminder that, is it really worth staying? I asked that to a lot of people. Was it worth it? And I've never heard anybody say, oh yeah, it was worth it. You know, I'm glad I stayed. So that's something that I think a lot of people need to take away from it. But again, another important reminder, I think, after talking to everybody, was the fact that surviving the hurricane actually is the easy part. It's the day after starts the biggest struggle for most people that they'll ever face in their life. You got to imagine they're dealing with their life completely, as they knew it, completely gone. Their hometown likely never going to be the same. A lot of their neighbors will never be there, or unfortunately are dead. Then they have to fight with the insurance companies. Then they have to fight with FEMA. Then it's just a fight. And it just wears on you. And we're talking to some people. There's kind of a zone, you know, we have to get this movie out in a certain amount of time, right? We need to just to catch certain dates. And so there's only so much time we have to talk to people. But the last interviews were in December. And, some of these folks are just defeated by this. We go into a neighborhood, Harlem Heights, where it's a historically Black neighborhood. It didn't have the forceful storm surge like you saw in Fort Myers Beach, where it's just like a tsunami basically coming in, but it had 7 feet of water in it. And these are homes, old, cinder block homes that were built again in the 1960s, and folks that were living there. We speak with a guy, and his dad and his mom, who were in their 80s, 90s, were in that house. And, it was a close-knit community, and a guy really stepped up and saved a lot of people in that neighborhood. It's really an incredible story that I'm so glad we were able to highlight. But when we were there, we're talking to the son, and he's this giant teddy bear of a man. He's 6'6", probably. He's massive. And his heart is just broken seeing we're interviewing him, and things are breaking, cracking, because he's having somebody that's having to come in and literally take everything. So if you look in the trailer and you see that wall being collapsed, that's like some sort of little skid steer that's knocking down walls, and everything is in there is ruined from the water and the mold. So it's just all his memories and his childhood's just being deconstructed, as he said. And he's like, they've given me so much, and I can't afford to give them anything right now. I can barely give them a place to stay. So it's just, again, a reminder of the story doesn't stop after the cameras kind of pack up. And that's why we're making these documentaries. We're hoping we'll find an audience for it, because we're able to let people share their stories a little bit more, and we're able to be there a little longer than the news cameras and go a little bit more in depth. And I think there's a place for people to want to have their stories shared. Like, nobody says no to us. They want somebody to know what they're going through. They want a collective understanding of what has happened to them, and they want whatever's happened to them to matter, and they want that story shared. So it's actually one of the easiest things to ever talk to people, because they want this out there. They're like, what can I do? How can I help you? Like, he went and grabbed his mom for us to interview. So, and
speaking about getting an audience for it, I mean, you certainly are going to have that, at least with the 2023 Sunscreen Film Festival, which is at the end of April. So congratulations on getting into there. That's huge. And
we're super excited. Yeah.
Talk about that.
Yeah. I mean, it's a very prestigious film festival in the circuit, especially here in Florida. It's a great timing for us too, because it's right before hurricane season starts. So I think this is a great film to have right before the hurricane season, and people start thinking about it June 1st. And so it's a great timing for it. Location wise, it's perfect too, because folks from Fort Myers are going to be able to come up and see it, and be there for the premiere and see their stories on the big screen. And I'm telling you, it's a lot different than seeing it on your laptop or your cell phone or your TV. Seeing it on a big screen is a whole different experience. And so we're really excited by that. And Sunscreen trusted us when the deadline to get entered, our film had just started being edited. And so they saw the trailer, and they trusted us enough to kind of consider us, at least at that moment. And we were able to get this done and edited. And I think that they are going to be very pleased with our product and what they're going to show in their festival, and they'll be proud to have us, but we're really proud to be there.
That's great. And very happy for you that you guys got it done. Who did the editing? Was that Andy who did the editing?
Andy Coates. And I mean, at times it's kind of crazy, because you'll see the credits, you'll see Jonathan, Brandon, Andy, like doing everything, right? And it's really just a 3-man team. Obviously this film, Max and Aaron, Max Olson, Aaron Rigsby, we gave them some AP credits, because their video, the storm surge video, we couldn't have done it without them. And just connecting with the people we connected with, they had a huge hand in that as well. But I'm just really proud of our team at Climate Productions, that we're able to produce something this quality, this impactful, and with just 3 of us. I think it's a testament to the talents that we complement each other, and I'm really proud of what we've produced.
Yeah, you should be. And I really hope that that the film festival screening is just the first step. And like I was telling you before, I could totally see this on Netflix, although I know, and it would even be more impactful on a huge screen. So if it was in movie theaters, that would be amazing as well.
Hey, Netflix, give me a call. I'd love to.
I know. Honestly, I'd love to see it on Netflix. I just think that'd be a great way to really get it out to people. And even people who don't live in Florida, who are never going to experience a hurricane. God, that footage and I think would really bring it. If you live up in the Pacific Northwest or something, or landlocked somewhere in Kansas, or I guess they got tornadoes in Kansas, but it's so unique. The hurricane experience. I feel like it can really convey that to a whole world of people that will never experience it other than seeing it on the news or whatever.
I think people love to see good stories, and this is a good story. And as a storyteller, we want as big an audience as possible, and we really hope that with appearing on podcasts with you and more and more people see it, that it'll get the audience that it deserves, because these stories definitely deserve to be seen and heard and understood. And I think that also in a non-sarcastic way, this will save lives if the right person sees it, because the next hurricane, they might think of like this video or this story and make a different decision. Because the decisions we make, and this relates to any disaster I ever go on, or any severe weather or any crazy weather I cover, it's like a minute decision that is made can be the difference between life and death.
And honestly, this is probably the best warning footage that can be out there for storm surge, because I think you're right. A lot of people just don't consider storm surge, or aren't really fully informed about what that means. But this illustrates it in a way that is like that you can issue all the forecasts, and I know that they oftentimes use really strong language like life-threatening storm surge, and what does that exactly mean? Well, this is going to show you. This footage really.
And I feel it's presented in a way it's not talking down to people. We're not here to scare people. Like, this isn't like life-threatening. We're not using that language. It's like, we don't need to. I can tell a very genuine story and share these first-person experiences in this video, and you can make your own decision about it. You're right. I'm not here to preach. I'm not here to stand on a soapbox. I'm here to show the reality. And I think that that's another thing that I'm proud of, how we tell our stories. It's different than a lot of films. We don't need to scare people. Like, I have no interest in doing that. I think people turn off when they know they're being BS'd. There's no BS. This is all true. This is all real. You can see the relationship we as filmmakers develop with the people in this film, the genuine respect and care and sympathy and compassion that we have for them and they have for us. I think that that's a way that separates our storytelling from most of what you see. And I really hope that translates in turn to people maybe paying attention a little bit more, because they know they're not trying to be scared. They're not trying to be hyped, that this is just a real story. And I think that that's the best way to communicate to people.
So let's take a look. We'll just play the whole trailer, if that's all right here, just to show people, give people a taste of it. And this has all the people you've been talking about here. I know we've probably seen a couple clips of it, but let's watch that now.
Got it? All right. Okay. Woo! Goodbye.
A lot of people might watch that video and they're like, man, those people in the house are stupid. We're not stupid. We just we didn't know never see anything like that. You don't expect something like that.
A storm surge watch is in effect, and the hurricane watch.
Seen a bunch of palm fronds flying down the street, and I was like, this is it. We're in a hurricane now. It wasn't. That was just the beginning. I don't know what I'm gonna do. I don't know how I'm gonna explain this to people when they say, where did the net go? What happened to the dogs? I'm like, I don't know. I had to let go.
You're pretty much convinced that you just posted somebody die.
Who's in here? Hello?
And I think the worst part for me was being absolutely certain that my friends are dead. I just felt like there's no way they're surviving this. I'm really worried about my neighbor. He's over there by himself.
Yeah, I hung on to the tree. I was told it was 2 hours. I don't know.
Man, sooner or later my house gonna be on the water. Look at that shit.
The last thing I heard my mother say was that there was water coming in the house.
It was meant for me to be there. For some reason, it was meant. We had some elderly people in the neighborhood, see what I'm saying? So my mind instinct was, like I said, let's get them out.
Ian was another wake-up call to all of us. This is, again, another way to tell Floridians we are one of the most vulnerable states.
I think this was like literally Ian was the push I needed to leave. Sorry.
You think about it the other way, it's like determination, blah, blah, blah. It was just survival.
We were floating down the street. We had nowhere to go.
There's no power like the power of the ocean or Mother Nature. I've never seen anything like that in my life. Everything is completely gone, like a bomb went off,
Gotta love Southwest Florida, but there's a risk.
So that was the trailer. Amazing. So I encourage everyone, if you get a chance to see this movie, if you're down in the Tampa area in late April, to give the dates. What are the dates of the film festival?
Sunscreen is the 27th through the 30th, I believe, and don't quote me on that end date, but right now it's scheduled to appear on the 28th of April. Still talking with them about some scheduling. Right now it's scheduled to be in the morning. I'm hoping to move that as a selfish move, just because I really want as many people from Fort Myers to come up. And if it's at this current time, they're going to have to get up super early to make the drive from Fort Myers. It's about 2.5 hour drive from there to St. Petersburg. Yeah. So I want to give, the folks that are in our film as much of a chance as possible to come up and see it on the big screen. They're going to have a chance to see it one way or another, but it's a different experience to see it on that big screen. So we're hoping that there might be a little bit of a tweak in the schedule, but it's all on the film festival's website, which you're going to have a link to, and people can check out and get the up-to-date schedule and the pricing of tickets and stuff like that. And, we want to fill that. We want to fill that theater because I think there's even skepticism in certain circles that does this kind of filmmaking from a local independent company, does that even matter? When we have these big Hollywood productions, I think it does matter. And I want to show people that these kind of films can be successful and they can fill a theater up, and they should be featured in festivals like Sunscreen. There's a place for good storytelling. It doesn't matter if we're not attached to Nat Geographic or anything like that, or Disney.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think it's important actually that you're not, in some ways, what you're doing, what Brandon and many others in that whole storm chasing scene is great. And it's not Hollywood necessarily, but like you said, it's an important story to tell. And I think from what I've seen, you guys have done an amazing job of doing it.
Yeah. Well, I hope you can come down.
I wish I could. I don't know if I'm going to be able to be down there, Jonathan. I'm actually going to be in Florida about 2 weeks before that.
Oh, okay.
Down in Marco Island, actually. But I wish I could. I wish I could come down there. I don't know. Maybe I'll try to find a way.
Where do you fly into to go to Marco?
We fly into Fort Myers.
So if you have a chance, just to make that drive to the beach, it's going to be really cleaned up at this point.
Yeah.
Like, you're going to see a lot of empty lots. There might start some construction might start up, but it's still kind of a sight to behold. There's still going to be some rubble, but it's, they're progressing it. But these kind of disasters, it's really a years-long process, 5 to 10 years, to get normality back.
Yeah.
And who knows if the hurricane seasons will let 5 to 10 years pass peacefully there.
I know. Listen, I wanted to talk to you too about Southwest Florida. You've been living there for, how long have you been living there for now?
I call St. Pete, or this part, Tampa Bay, my adult home, because I've been here since 2006. So I moved here in my early 20s, and I never want to leave. I love living here. I could live anywhere I want right now. But it's when I leave to go someplace and cover some bad weather, even if it's in a beautiful place like California, I still come home to paradise. And I always feel like I'm coming back to vacation, right? Vacation. Yeah. So I love living here. It's great. It's quiet. It's picked up a lot. It's changed. I mean, St. Petersburg since 2015 is a whole different place. A lot of buildings, a lot more condos and hotels and just energy, which is great. But it's still, and I like Miami. I'm not talking bad about Miami, but it's not Miami. It's different.
Yeah.
It's a lot more.
Gulf Coast is certainly different than the Atlantic coast of Florida.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And how do you think that all like contrasts with your upbringing? You come from a very small town in Colorado, right?
Swink. I mean, you couldn't be further away from Swink, Colorado, in the plains. I call it Canorado because it looks like Kansas. It's so flat in the southeastern part of the state of Colorado. But yeah, I grew up on a farm with a ranch. We mostly had sheep and goats and horses and a few cattle every once in a while, but it was mostly sheep and goats. And I didn't ever want to do that life. It's a tough life. My dad and my mom were always supportive of me getting an education and doing something else with my life. And so that was really cool because you hear stories and you see friends and neighbors that maybe were pressured to kind of keep that lifestyle. And I still love going back. I love where I grew up and I love the lessons and how it taught me to work. Because doing what I do now, especially, the only thing I've ever seen more difficult is my parents during lambing season in the spring being up for so many weeks to ensure that these baby lambs were born and were taken care of. Yeah. And so that kind of work and that hard work really transformed me. And it's how I approach my job, how I can push through being absolutely exhausted in the absolute worst conditions on the planet. And it's because of how I grew up. So that farm kid grew up and takes that work ethic and to doing what I do now. And that's how I push through things. And it's how Brandon and I get along, because the only person I've seen work harder than my parents is this guy, is Brandon Clement. So it matches pretty well.
And that town Swink is very small, like fewer than 1,000 people, right?
It's less than 500 people.
Less than 500. Wow.
Yeah. My graduating class, I graduated from another town, but you're looking at graduating classes in the teens to 20s.
That's amazing. Wow.
Yeah. So it's really small.
And what do your parents think about you now? Like, what do they think? Do they get scared for you, knowing that you're going into these crazy storms?
Well, my dad passed away in 2011, but my mom, I just promised her that I'm in the safest, most dangerous place.
Yeah.
Let that sink in.
I bet that she probably has no concerns then.
Yeah, right. She'll say her prayers, but she trusts me to do the best I can. And a lot of what we do, people think that we're needlessly putting ourselves in harm's way, and you're crazy, and how are you doing this? We have a lot of experience in understanding how weather really works. And so we plan the chaos as best we can. And then if we can't plan everything, we try and just make it work. And if it doesn't work, well, it's dangerous getting out of bed every morning too. So there's nothing better I love in life than being in chaos. Chaos is my favorite thing. If you were to say, all right, Jonathan, you can be in this absolute moment of chaos for 5 hours, or you could go to a trip to the Maldives and all expenses paid. I would choose the 5 hours of chaos anytime, every time. It's the most freedom I feel. That's how I try and live my life is through one word, is freedom. And how do I get freedom? And so that means, taking the steps necessary to make money, to do this, to do that. But when you're in chaos, it doesn't matter what this official says or this law, or it's like everybody is just focused in that moment. We're not worrying about the past. We're not worrying about the future. We're all we're forced to be in that moment in time. And it's such a relief for me and how I work that I love it. I love the chaos. I love being in those moments where you're just so hyper focused and in that moment in time. And I try my best to get in those moments as often as possible.
Yeah. Do you ever get scared in those moments though? I mean, when you've been in basically the eye of numerous storms, right? So that means you had to go through the eye wall of a hurricane, which is completely deadly.
Yeah, I've been in every category of hurricane. I mean, I'm not leading the pack in terms of like most hurricanes ever, but I'm up there. Like I've done.
You've been in a bunch, yeah.
Yeah.
Of notorious hurricanes.
For sure. And no, because again, we're planning the chaos, right? We're doing our best to have a plan, to have like the escape routes, to have the protection. You're focused on doing your job and stuff. And I've lost. It's kind of like I'm not an adrenaline junkie. I'm not looking for the adrenaline part of it. I don't really feel like I even get a boost of the adrenaline from it. Like, ooh, that was close. That's not what it's about. It's like, again, being in the chaos is where I get my joy. So I'm a chaos junkie, you could say. But I will say that I have burned off fear. So whatever fear I might have had before, like I can remember the older I got, the more difficult it was for me to like do cliff jumping, right? From a high place into water. Mm-hmm. Now I'll go like jump off any cliff. I don't care. Like I just don't have that same sense anymore that I did. Because I think you see life in a different way when you go through something as transformative as these big storms, and you see how little control we have in this world when you see something as powerful as a hurricane, which I don't think there's anything more powerful in this world than a hurricane. And you're just humbled before this natural thing that's happening. And you just realize that maybe I'm not as significant as I think I am. And you just got to have to try and make the most out of it and enjoy as much as you can.
I mean, it's like an act of God, a hurricane,
Absolutely. It is. It's the hand of God.
The hand of God. Do you feel like, I don't know if you're religious or do you believe in God? Do you think that when you're in those, are you like closer to God in some way?
I do. I am religious. I'm Christian. I pray. I'm not I don't go to church every Sunday kind of guy, but I believe that I get closer to God when I'm in these moments. For sure.
Really?
I feel I'm about as close as I can be to God in disasters, but also in beautiful places. Like when you're, I can't tell you how many times over the last few weeks when I've been in California covering, the feet of snow there, the flash flooding and stuff, but there's just so many beautiful places in California. I'm just like, this is just unbelievably beautiful now that it's green and vibrant because it's had so much water.
Right.
So I feel very close to God when I'm outside, whether it's in beautiful places or in disasters like hurricanes or tornadoes or even blizzards. Yeah. You just feel the power.
I guess I'm wondering too, like the extreme, in the really extreme situations though, do you feel it more so, or is it just something you feel like when you're in nature pretty much?
I think both, because there's that extreme beauty and then the extreme nature of a hurricane. You both kind of feel closer to God, I think. But that's just my personal, experience and feeling. And I definitely, I feel more humbled because, sometimes in life we can be very arrogant about what we've done or how we've done something. And then you realize there's something way more powerful than us. And we're just lucky to be able to be in that moment in time. So,
yeah. I mean, the reason I'm asking really, I guess, because you sort of said the chaos, that you feel good in that chaos, but you certainly feel it. But also most people do not experience as much as you have. Obviously the people you talk to in your movie have experienced it, but they haven't experienced it to the degree that you have, repeatedly.
Yeah. I mean,
I think you have a unique perspective,
Yeah, I mean, and again, I wouldn't trade it for anything. I love it. I love the fact that I can travel the country, even the world, and I can experience these moments that are generational. As a journalist, what is important about this is that I get to experience and write kind of the first page of history. So that's a really cool thing for me, that when people talk about Hurricane Ian, I've been there. I have the experience. I wrote that first page of history. And this is a generational thing. So I'm a part of generational moments several times a year, whether it's a flash flood, whether it's a blizzard, a snowstorm, whether it's a hurricane. And that's really kind of something, because people will talk about this. People's grandkids will talk about their grandfather, right, that was in this storm. We still talk about Charlotte. We talk about Katrina. We talk about Andrew. And you keep going back, right? These names are so synonymous with such a powerful event. So it's kind of cool to be a part of those.
Yeah. And I'm sure, and no doubt Ian will end up being retired by is it the National Hurricane Center, or is it the
It's the World Meteorological Organization, and I named storms are actually the most commonly named retired storms. So they just
crazy,
had,
right?
yeah, I mean, they just had retired, Irma, and then Ida,
Ida,
the
right?
year before, and then now Ian.
Yeah. Yeah, it's unbelievable. No doubt, you're right in all of that, and like you said, it is you're literally involved in history and framing history, really, and really, this is almost not. I feel like your movie's not quite a first draft, like what you guys did there in the moment was, but this is really you're talking to people, and well after the fact, like you said, a couple of months after you were still doing
we're letting them kind of settle over them and settle in their mind. And when you hear stories there, it's told in a really chaotic way. So a big part of my job as a writer was to translate these stories, right? To interpret them and put them together in a coherent thought, because we go from one thing to another thing to this to that, because it's still so scattered, and it's such a frantic moment of their life. And it's so foreign to what they've experienced that it's tough to get that coherent, like,
a narrative,
way of telling it, right?
Yeah,
and understanding. So that was a big part of what I did. And again, it's cool that we don't have, like, there's no agenda here. There's no, like, I don't have anybody over my shoulder, like a producer saying, well, I don't think we can use that word. I don't think we can talk about this subject. You know, it's like, I don't have that. I can do whatever I want. I paid for this. This is my money. This is my time. This is Brandon's money, his time, Andy's money, his time. This is all of our money and time. And so it's a cool sense of freedom. And again, we would love to have money. Please pay us for our work. But we're really proud that we can produce it.
That's got to feel good. And as you're talking about that, it reminds me, you are a great storyteller. And I've seen it so many times in so many ways. But one thing I wanted to mention was one of my favorite stories you ever did was about Tampa. And you alluded to it earlier in this conversation when you mentioned it's been more than 100 years since the Tampa Bay area has taken a direct hit from a hurricane. And you did an amazing story a couple of years ago about that, and about sort of why some people in that area think that they've been able to elude the hurricanes. I mean, even as I think Ida, didn't Ida come very close, like maybe within 60 miles or something?
Irma. Irma was the last storm that we thought this area was going to get nailed. But it made a cut into Marco Island, where you're going to go to. Right. And that's where it made landfall. But we thought it was going to come into the Gulf and then come in and then curve back around into Tampa Bay. But
didn't Ida too? I thought Ida came right up, like parallel along the Florida coast. Didn't do anything.
No, that was further to the west, because it made landfall right around New Orleans. Yeah. But no, there's every year we're under the gun. We're just kind of waiting, because it's been, like I said, over 101 years. And what you're alluding to is the mythology that surrounds Indian mounds. So there were a lot of Indian Native American tribes that called this place home. And there's massive mounds that still exist in certain parts of where I live in Pinellas County. And people think that it was imbued with some sort of protection from these bad storms. One of the, is that true? Well, major hurricanes do happen here on a semi basis, right? It happens not often. It's not like certain parts, but it does happen here. And ironically, the first European who introduced grapefruits and oranges, citrus growing to this part of the Florida, he and his family back in the 1800s took shelter on one of these Indian mounds up in Safety Harbor, because it's a really tall, high mound. And I don't know if it was a temple or if it was just a place to bury midden or whatever. But that's where he survived the storm, because the surge was so high, they had to go seek shelter on top of that hill that was an actual Indian mound. And so it's a fascinating tradition. People will kind of smirk about it around here in the Tampa Bay area. They'll say, oh, well, we're not going to have a hurricane because the Indian mounds are protecting us. But yeah, it's kind of a fun myth.
Yeah, it's an interesting story, and it's also it's out there. It's part of the culture, it's part of the lore. But I just love that you found that story and covered it, and I love
history. So when I'm going out and I'm telling stories, I find these quirks that have been forgotten, because humans forget so quick. Like I think now our attention spans are like goldfish, right? We're on TikTok, 7 seconds. That's good. So it's tough to remember these things. And that's why I do like these are some of my favorite things, to tell stories like that, to harken back to history, to have a tie from our past to our present.
Yeah, it's so easy to forget. Yeah, it's great that you do that. Do you have a favorite story that you've covered in your years? Is Ian it, or maybe something else?
I mean, it always comes down to experiences, and Cuba, I just shared just a little bit of our Cuba experience. I'm telling you, that was the craziest thing I've ever done, and like some of the craziest stories ever that have never been told, have never, been broadcast or anything like that. And Cuba's this much of our film. Again, it's all about Southwest Florida. That's the main focus of what we're doing. This is my favorite story I think I've ever told, it's just damn good. And I'm really, really proud of it. So I do love that aspect about it. There's been some small feature stories that have been kind of quirky that I've done in the past, but as far as all my work, it kind of has led up to this documentary, Price of Paradise, Surviving Hurricane Ian. I don't think there's been anything that I produced that's been higher quality or better than this film right here. And so I'm really, really proud of what, again, our talents bring together, because could I do this all by myself? No, I need Andy. Andy and I have a great relationship. We balance each other as storytellers. We have a rhythm together. There's a rhythm to a story. He gets where my mind works and how I piece together these puzzles, and he fills in gaps and stuff. And so it's a great complementary team that we have. Brandon does a great job at looking at the film for details and shots, and of course provides amazing footage, from the drones, etc. He's a great producer. And so all of our talents combined, I think, really have made this something that we're proud of, and why I say that the best story, or my favorite story, is this one.
Yeah. And how is there any way that people can support this? How can like people who are not going to be in Florida, let's say, for the film festival, what can they do to support you guys and to help you make this a success?
Just if they can, more than anything, support us on social media, like, share, comment, subscribe. That matters to spread who we are and what we do. And, when this trailer comes out, I'll share the trailer with you, and they can share that link on their own social media and stuff like that. Just again, to kind of build a momentum, hoping there's a snowball effect to it more than anything is,
absolutely,
they really grow.
And Jonathan, just quickly mention the social media. Where do you want people to look? I'll put it on the screen.
The best place is YouTube for me, Jonathan Petramala. That's it, on YouTube.
Yeah.
If you like TikTok, chasing_stories is another spot people are attracted to. I stay away from Meta as much as possible, because there's a whole copyright thing going on with Facebook, and they say that I'm not producing unique content. So so many people are stealing my content and then claiming it for their own.
Oh God.
I've been demonetized. And I'm like,
on Facebook,
hey Meta, really? I'm literally in these videos. Like, how is this not my content? Like,
yeah,
I'm in them. So I've been in a struggle with them. There's, I wish that I could be monetized in that as well right now, but right now I'm restricted. So it's a big fight. But yeah, YouTube's great.
YouTube and Twitter. You're on Twitter, right?
Yeah, J Petramala, but I don't get paid on Twitter. So I like to push people.
Right, you don't get paid on Twitter, but so people can know what you're up to. I feel like that's a good way to.
Yeah, J Petramala on Twitter as well is a good spot. And I think those are the three favorites that I put more of my attention to, is YouTube, TikTok, and Twitter.
Got it. Yeah. Well, that's good. So hopefully people follow you, people see this. I think it looks like an amazing film, and just knowing you as much as I do, I imagine that it certainly is. And knowing what Brandon and Andy do too, because it's interesting, Jonathan. I think I've met you in person once in my life, but obviously I was very involved in your work, maybe even more so than and similarly with, I've never met Brandon, never met Andy in person. I don't think I've ever actually even talked to them on an email. Maybe I have, I'm not sure, but they do great work, and I can see that. And you guys seem like a great little team.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really blessed that we're together. that they trusted me to bring them together, and we trust each other to work on these kind of projects. And, we're putting our money where our mouth is in this. We talk about funding and this and that. Like, I mean, again, we're paying for this. We believe in it. And as a storyteller, I believe in it so much that I'm talking with you. I'm trying to get as much attention to this as possible, because it is something that we truly, truly believe in, and we're really proud of it. And I think that if people give us a chance and give us, which is a big sacrifice, but their time, I think that it's going to be worth their hour and 23 seconds of their time.
Yeah, that's great. Well, this was fun, Jonathan. Your stories are amazing. I'm so glad that you were safe, that you didn't get hurt through any of this. That I always think is amazing. I don't know how you guys do it when you're going into these situations and you come out unscathed. I don't think. Have you ever had an injury or anything?
No,
that's amazing.
Not even close calls. I mean, again, when I'm telling you that I'm not an adrenaline junkie, like, I don't want adrenaline from these. Like, I don't want to be like, "Whoo, that was close." So, we plan these out. So it's really a difference, I think, from a perspective that some people might have about what we do. It's pretty chill. We're very deliberate in every action that we take. And that's why I think we do it about as good or better than anybody.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, this is fun. Thank you for talking to me, and thanks for taking the time, and all the best of luck with the movie going forward. Hopefully, see it at some other film festivals too, and maybe somewhere, in other venues.
I hope so. Fingers crossed. Great. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for the time. It's been great.
Absolutely. This is fun. So take care, Jonathan.
Thank you.